Okay, hi everyone, and welcome. My name is Gaziel. I'm co-founder of Leal, and I'm also the Chief Science Officer. And today with me is Anthony. Hi, Anthony.
Hey, Avital. My name is Anthony Gulotta. I run sales here at Leal. Looking forward to the discussion.
Okay, so we can start by just discussing a little bit why is NGS even needed? I think that at this point, everyone kind of understands that this is, the bread and butter of effective cancer treatment, right? NGS is needed, and especially any genetic testing, but NGS even better for identifying and personalize the treatment options for patients. So a lot of the new treatments, a lot of the treatments that are investigational right now and treatments that are coming out of clinical trials and are being approved in the clinic are based on specific alterations and mutations in the patient's cancer. In order to identify them, we need NGS, or we need any type of genetic testing. The most comprehensive ones are NGSs. So Anthony, one thing that we know, and this is good news for us, is that at least in the realm of getting tested, we're doing very well. Meaning, in terms of where we were 5 years ago versus where we're at now, we see a lot of patients actually getting tested, which is great, which is also aligned with, national, international recommendations for patients to get tested for genetic mutations that they have for their tumors. So we see about 50% of patients, they get tested. So this is getting much better, but there are other challenges. Okay, so I'm gonna maybe focus more on talking about and speaking about challenges from the patient's perspective and also from the physician's perspective. And then maybe, Anthony, you can talk a little bit about what's going on in the industry. Okay, so one thing that is very clear to us is that unfortunately, they are holding their genetic testing results. Still, there is a lack of knowledge of the patients and how to interpret the report correctly. Meaning that a patient can be, proactive about their disease, they're going to the doctors, they're actually running the test, they're getting the results, and they're standing in front of the results, and they don't know what to do next because it's very hard to interpret. Of course, there are gaps of knowledge, but also there is no standardization. There is no standard formatting for the different labs that are actually running it. So it's very hard to explain to patients and educate patients about how to interpret the results, and also in the definitions themselves. So if we now just, for the sake of discussion, I took two reports, one of them from a pretty common lab and another one from a less common, but what you can see very clearly is that the reports are very different in their looks. Just by looking at them, they're looking very different, and also the results that are actually shared. So on the left-hand side, you'd see that, some of the biomarkers here are actually not mutated, but, the lab is telling the patient that they have tested it, but it's pretty confusing for a patient. Is that mutated? Is that significant? Is that something that I need to do something about? Or is it just here for information's sake, right? While the report on the right, for example, only includes the biomarkers that are actually mutated. So lack of formatting, lack of standardization is one big problem that we have when we are trying to educate patients and also kind of drive patients to act on their genetic testing results. So that's one big issue that we're seeing with currently with genetic testing reports that are coming from different labs. And this is just one of the problems. Another major problem that we see is that the output that the lab is giving based on the genetic testing is pretty limited. What do I mean by that? Usually a patient would see, a patient or their physician, their oncologist, they're going to see the alterations, and then there are going to be some recommendations for treatments, for standard of care treatment and for clinical trial treatments, okay? But the issue is that many of the clinical trial options, as you can see in this specific example, again, one big central lab for genetic testing, is that many of these options, they do not consider key disease characteristics when they suggest the potential clinical trials, for example. So I just took one example. So what we see is that about 85% of the options on the list are actually not a good match for this specific patient that we see right now, the genetic testing that belong to that patient. And the reason is that we are not augmenting, we are not adding the additional disease characteristics into that when we are considering. So all of the recommendations are only based on the mutation. So you see that out of this page, and this is, for example, just an EGFR patient that has this mutation, we see only one trial, actually two trials that are relevant for this patient, and one of them does not consider also stuff like personal preference. Like we see here, this trial is actually being run in China. So not sure if the patient is ready to fly to China to participate in this clinical trial, meaning that this option, even if it is clinically valid, it doesn't really consider a preference like travel. And this is also a major issue for patients that are coming, in real time to examine what to do next with their disease. So that's another big gap that we're seeing with current reports that are coming out of the big labs. One thing that we're actually also saying that there is a lack also for the standard of care in this example, as we can see here, there is a lack of immediate and actionable solutions for the patients that are based on the results that they're getting. So in here, you would see the standard of care options. And again, not actually matched to the disease status. For example, this patient here is getting a lot of options that are actually relevant for a specific timing in the disease status, for progression and not for newly diagnosed, right? Because the guidelines are actually telling you that even if you have this mutation, this drug option is not the recommended option for you, right? So there is a gap here that someone needs to close, right? This would be the oncologist, right? But then the information that is coming out of the report is not sufficient in order to make an immediate actionable decision about your treatment, because there is a knowledge gap happening here, okay, because of this gap in understanding the full disease characteristic or disease profile or patient profile, as we call it in Leal. So this is one thing that we're seeing here. Another thing that we're seeing here is that there are no drug options for alterations, let's say, that are less studied. So for example, this patient, and I'm showing just snapshots here, for example, have additional mutations in genes like BRCA or PIK3CA, okay, for which there are some approved drugs, but you're not going to see them here because, let's say, the indication is not necessarily for, approved for these drugs, or just because, it's going to be in the next page or in the next page, right? It's like disappearing, where the sheer attention is actually given to the most, let's say, central or the most common mutation that actually appearing on the report. So that's another gap that we are noticing. And of course, from the point of view of the physician, and this is again no-brainer, to go through a 50-page genetic testing report of a patient is something that, even if you are, aware of all of the trials and all of the treatments and you're very thorough, it just takes too long, okay? And there is a lack of time that is very evident for oncologists and healthcare providers to actually go through this and understand and decipher and analyze and actually get some actionable decisions based on the information that appears in the report. And sometimes there is also a lack of knowledge, right? Sometimes we're, as a doctor, you would look at it and you would look at the specific alteration, and it's not very clear whether this is now significant, right? Whether this is something that is actually actionable or not. So this lack of knowledge and a lack of time leads a lot of the times to this deficit in the way that the NGS reports are being interpreted, and actually how this actually translates into the patient journey and the decisions about the treatments. So I think this summarizes it from the point of view of the patient and the physician. And maybe, Anthony, you can take it further and speak about pharma.
Super helpful. Thanks, Avital. Yeah, so just for context, my team and I are the ones actually interfacing with biopharma and discussing best practices and innovations as it relates to clinical program efficiencies and best practices specific to NGS strategies. We've been really, at the forefront of educating the industry on the importance of two core strategies. First has been deploying a direct-to-patient approach, which I'll touch upon shortly. But second, and more importantly, and definitely more relevant to today's discussion, is implementing oncology-specific strategies as it relates to websites, technology, pre-screeners, clinical support staff, and more. And Avital mentioned touched upon it in her section, but think about how much the industry invests in developing targeted therapies today. Even just from our lens, an overwhelming number of the studies that we support are targeting rare genetically altered mutations. Sponsors are now leveraging our patented, unsupervised GenAI algorithm called precision medical modeling that's coupled with large language modeling, or LLM, to deliver accurate and scalable results specific to patient identification, education, disease characteristic verification through enrollment and dosing. As mentioned before, our direct-to-patient approach is vastly different from your traditional route of gathering these biomarker data sets. I can't tell you how many times a sponsor has said, we purchased a list of NRG1 fusion patients from a diagnostics company, and now we're having real difficulty engaging with the treating physician, let alone the patient themselves. So Leal's network of over 200,000 cancer patients and growing around 4,000 to 5,000 signups per month represents empowered patients actively seeking relevant treatment options. Additionally, we recently surpassed 15,000 HCPs in our network who will also have access to our NGS analyzer. So with that being said, Avital brought up on your screen, this is actually our HCP-facing solution. Now Avital is going to transition over to our actual solution and software. We're going to walk you through the patient and HCP flow. So this is our actual website landing page. You can see this is our V2 of the solution, actually launched this week. So we're really excited about this. Our next level in terms of the algorithm is being able to ingest medical record uploads, or a patient or physician can also answer a dynamic question manually. It's either or there, but we're really excited for that launch. Moving forward to the next screen, this is where HCPs do most of their interaction with Leal's solution. So this is where physicians can quickly select additional disease characteristics, as you see Avital going through on your screen now, that they want to include along with our system's interpretation of the biopsy report. So this is important for increased accuracy because, as Avital mentioned earlier in her section, traditionally treatment recommendations are based solely or primarily on the biomarker findings in the biopsy report, which may not always be relevant to that individual patient. So now you can see the ability where Avital clicked on upload a biopsy report. We're able to, in this scenario, upload a 50+ page biopsy report, and within seconds, that patented unsupervised GenAI algorithm, like I mentioned before, called precision medical modeling, combs through the unstructured text to decipher and extract the positive biomarkers in this patient profile. You can see that.
If we have time, I'm actually gonna show the actual report with all I shared a little bit of this report before, but you can see that there are a lot of biomarkers on this report. Only one of them, the BRAF, actually appeared on the first page, and the rest were not. So,
that's definitely super helpful for us to see that. And then you can see within seconds, scalable on the back end, we've deciphered and extracted and standardized those biomarkers that were positive in that medical profile. And then on the right-hand side, you can actually see a short list of relevant treatment options that are targeting that specific biomarker or those biomarkers for that specific patient profile. You can see that first study is actually a partnered study of ours. It's Artios. They're stack ranked in terms of their positioning to ensure maximum visibility across these matched patients. But then also our algorithm on the back end is taking into consideration the match rank, or basically the clinical methodology that the therapies being administered in this trial make to the medical profile of that patient, i.e. meaning if I have a specific biomarker and this therapy is administering and they're targeting that biomarker, it will be higher on that relevancy ranking page for patients and physicians to interact with.
Yeah. So one thing that is worth mentioning, that we are at accuracy and recall on these reports that is excellent, meaning that we're not really missing anything. Okay, so anything that is actionable and, you know, as is altered on these reports is actually going to appear on the biomarker list. And then, you know, physicians will be able to look at all of the options. And, you know, Anthony, I wanted to tell you about this case. I chose it because I think it exemplifies a lot of the advantages that are very clear here. So it saves time, obviously. Okay, so it saves a lot of time. It actually bridges a lot of the knowledge gaps that patients may have and also physicians may have, or you know, the oncology nurse that are actually filling up this questionnaire together with the patient. And you know, we are able to add additional information about the treatments, about the number of lines. We can get into the actual treatments. We're not doing it right now, but you can go deeper and deeper. And if you decide that you want to actually investigate even more, you can click on it and you can learn even more and check qualification against the full eligibility criteria of the trial and see whether the patient qualifies or not. So it doesn't really end right there. And you can actually go even deeper and deeper until you actually get validation for the qualification of the patient. And then there is more information here about how to contact and how to refer and who to call, etc., in order to make patients and physicians' life easier. So that's one thing that is extremely important about it. But I chose this for an additional reason. One reason that I chose it is because this patient has, as I said, very prominent, very famous mutation in the BRAF gene. And as a result, a lot of the focus of the NGS tests and the proposed clinical trials and the proposed standard of care is focused around this BRAF mutation. Okay, and this is pretty expected. And you know, when you have a very prominent driver mutation in your tumor, so the go-to would be that mutation. But when you're using the Leal platform, you're actually opening the possibility of investigating and exploring all of the options that actually exist for you. And this is the case for this patient. So this patient has the BRAF. Another very nice anecdote about this patient is that when they filled out the questionnaire the first time, they actually did not upload the NGS test. So they just reported manually that they had the BRAF mutation, Anthony. And what happened was that they got the BRAF, clinical trial matches, the standard of care matches for BRAF, and that was expected. But then the patient went in again and updated their profile, and they used the NGS analyzer to upload their file, and then ended up being matched to an additional trial, and this is the ATM trial. So this is, as Anthony, you mentioned before, this is one of our partner, RTS, and the patient got matched to this trial. And we talked with the patient went with that list to the oncologist. The oncologist loved the idea. They thought that this was a very good option for the patient because they have been, treated with BRAF inhibitors before. The oncologist wanted to maybe try and target another mutation in the cell, and this actually made a lot of sense to the oncologist. And we helped referring this patient to the site, and they are actually enrolled he actually is enrolled in the clinical trial right now. So this makes a huge difference, right, for a patient and for the journey and the algorithm, right? The treatment algorithm is being impacted, right? So as a sponsor, and maybe Anthony, you can say a few more words about it. You want to be here. You want to be that sponsor, and the oncologist also, they want to see these options, right, in order to make a decision that is actually considering all of the options that are out there and not just the more obvious options.
And I feel like that's a prime example. And I also feel like the longer we have this, live in production, the more of these stories we're hearing anecdotally. That's just one of many that you and your team can, always share, internally at the company. But these stories are now really, really landing on the market and our biopharma partners. So really, I think we're just scratching the surface, and we're really excited to get this in the hands of all of our partnered sponsors.
Yeah, and of course, this also applies for other, parameters and other genetic alterations that are being, measured and tested in these genetic testing reports, right? So we're actually looking also on MSI levels. We're actually looking at HLA. We're looking at genomic instability in general. We're looking at tumor molecular burden. So anything that can be read out of the report, we analyze, and we can actually give access to this information and help using it when matching patients to clinical trials and for dinner treatments. Okay.
We keep hearing from the industry and our partners that the efforts that we're making in the oncology market, specifically within precision medicine and patient engagement, signifies significant advancement in the field. We're addressing a core challenge encountered by many sponsors in effectively engaging treating physicians and patients subsequent to them procuring lists of specific mutations from your traditional diagnostic companies. This is a critical issue that exists in conventional approaches. Our expansive network of cancer patients actively seeking participation in clinical trials, coupled with the HCPs who have access to our NGS analyzer, signify a proactive and really a revolutionary approach to solving these problems together. That's it in a nutshell. And please reach out to me at Anthony@Leal.Health to learn more.
So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. And thank you, Anthony, for your insight.
Thanks, everyone.
And goodbye.